The government shutdown is affecting people all across our region and all across the country. The shutdown is having a huge impact on Maryland, which has already been hit hard with federal job losses. As thousands of federal workers face furloughs, many are now wondering what can be done as lawmakers on both sides of the aisle can't seem to come to an agreement. Maryland Governor Wes Moore joined us now to talk a little bit more about what his state is doing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
As we mentioned, this is a double whammy for the people of Maryland. First, the federal job losses that already happened earlier this year, and now this impact on the 270,000 federal workers in the state. What is your plan to help, and what resources are available?
Yeah, you know, it's embarrassing that Congress cannot do the basic function job of being able to keep the government open. And the truth is that, you know, we've now seen how Donald Trump has been trying to essentially create a government shutdown for the past 9 months, where we've now seen over 15,000 Marylanders who are federal workers fired over these past months, that we have seen federal contractors losing roles, federal agencies that the Trump administration is trying to shutter. But the thing that we're showing in the state of Maryland is that we're going to take care of our people, and we're going to protect our people. And so just today, the same day that they announced that they were going to do a federal government shutdown, I have already announced a whole series of new initiatives that we're going to do to support our federal workers, and that includes making sure we're working with the private sector to avoid things like foreclosures and evictions and energy energy shutoffs during this time period. That we are going to make sure we are continuing and accelerating our work to be able to support our federal workers with unemployment insurance, and also things like our Feds to Eds initiatives and moving our federal workers into things like education and essential roles within our state. That we are going to make sure that we are extending supports for our federal workers and ensuring that they have a chance to really keep their footing at a time when we were watching the federal government having this full-on assault on the people of the state of Maryland.
So those resources, how do people find out about them? Do they need to go to a website? Because I know there are people at home right now thinking, you know, what if I don't have a paycheck in 2 weeks? What then?
Yeah, so people, if they want to learn more, they can just go to go.md.gov/federal shutdown. And they can see a whole series of resources that our state is moving and mobilizing on to make sure that our people are safe, to include the fact that as long as we can, the state will make sure that we are backfilling supports for things like Medicaid and things like SNAP and things like food assistance. Because when you're looking at the proposed Trump administration, they're talking about cutting off about 680,000 people from healthcare. That's the size of the population of Baltimore City. They're talking about cutting off food assistance to over 120,000 Marylanders. That's about the size of Wacomico County. So these are staggering numbers that we are seeing. And so the state is going to do our part and move aggressively to do our part to make sure that for as long as we can, that our people will not see these types of interruptions.
Let me ask you, because you've had some very strong words for the White House over the shutdown. You blamed President Trump. Why?
Well, because it's true. You know, I think about the fact that, you know, that you have the president, you have the House and the Senate that are all controlled by President Trump. And so for us to have a government shutdown, there is no other place to put the blame. And we have seen how for these past 9 months, President Trump has been hell-bent on being able to cut services and supports. We've seen how in Western Maryland, a place that voted for Donald Trump, got all federal disaster relief turned down. In fact, not a single state that did not vote for Donald Trump has gotten a single dollar of federal disaster relief since he has been the president of the United States. The president has been addressing his role, and it is petty, it has been partisan, and it's been punishing. And I don't function that way. You know, for our federal government, where they seem to be set on saying you're on your own, in the state of Maryland, you know, our philosophy is we leave no one behind. And that's why I am just so embarrassed and offended by the type of governance that we're seeing from Washington, D.C. right now, which does not seem to be intent on supporting any of us.
Let me ask you a little bit about the governments. There's been a lot of finger pointing between the Democrats and the Republicans, and that Republican messaging right now has been very loud that this is on the Democrats. The Democrats also have messaging out there, but it doesn't seem to be as loud. Do they need to change the messaging, and do Democrats bear any blame for this shutdown?
I mean, honestly, I don't think we should be spending our time finger pointing, because there are real people being hurt. You know, I spend every single day in our communities, and I know that the people who are losing their jobs are people who are doing things like making sure that our food is safe, making sure that our critical infrastructure is protected, making sure that veterans, like myself, veterans who came home are getting the medication that they need. And the thing that we have continued to see is, and I was very loud and vocal saying, I do not want a federal government shutdown because I know how much it's going to impact the people of my state. But I also know this, that kicking people off of health care should not be a prerequisite for keeping the government open. That is something that I just do not see how you have Republican lawmakers in Washington that thinks that is a rational position to be able to take.
But let me ask you, let me play devil's advocate here for a minute. What should the Democrats be doing? Because there are people at home right now that are saying both sides are wrong here. And in Washington, they're playing politics, and this is my everyday life.
And I think people who say that is totally understandable because they're the ones that are hurting. Because we have people who are sitting in, and I don't care if you're talking about St. Mary's County or Hartford County or Allegheny County or Baltimore County, who just don't understand how Congress is not performing their basic functions.
So do Democrats bear any responsibility?
I think when you were watching this government shutdown, when you were watching a negotiation that came around, do we keep the government open or do we cut people off of health care? Do we keep the government open or do we watch premiums jump by 70% for over 160,000 Marylanders? This is an impossible debate that we are having and one that is so heartless. And so I would hope that Congress could come to a solution where they can say we can both keep the government open and not have to lay off all of these people, and also say that we think healthcare is a right and not a privilege. And so I think that is a completely rational position, and one that I am completely confused that we do not have people in Washington, D.C. who understand this.
Let me ask you, Maryland State Senator Steve Hershey, a Republican who recently said he may run against you for governor. Today, we spoke with him and he placed blame for the shutdown and the effect on Marylanders at your feet. What's your response to that?
I have no response to that. I think that the people of our state know that I'm a fighter for the people of the state of Maryland, and that there has been no state that has been more aggressive in making sure that our people are going to be okay despite the chaos that we're seeing from Washington, D.C., than the state of Maryland. And there is no leader that has taken this moment more seriously to bring our state together, Democrats and Republicans, to be able to address the fundamental challenges that we have seen than us. That since I've been the governor, we've now added over 100,000 new jobs in Maryland. That's more than my predecessor added in 8 years. That we have had 30,000 new businesses start in Maryland or come to the state of Maryland since I've been the governor. That we have had an unemployment rate where we've gone from 43rd in the country to now having amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country. That we've seen some of the fastest drops in violent crime anywhere in the United States in the state of Maryland. We know we have more work to do. That's why I'm running for a second term. So frankly, I don't take what Steve Hershey says very seriously, and I don't think many Marylanders do either.
Let me ask you about running for that second term. Recently you said you will not run for president in 2028. You're still standing firm in that position?
Absolutely. No, I mean, people have said, are you absolutely ruling it out? And my answer is, I never ruled it in.
Okay.
I've never once said I've ever been interested in that job. I mean, the job that I love is the job I have right now. And it's one where I look at the momentum that Maryland has right now, despite everything, that we continue to show that there's a better way than what we're seeing in Washington, D.C. and what we're seeing from so many other states, where I think this is truly going to be Maryland's decade, and I'm excited to lead the charge.
Speaking of the presidential job, a number of names, including California Governor Gavin Newsom, some other names have been tossed around. Who would you like to see become the next president of the United States?
I have put zero thought into who should be the next president of the United States. All of my time is figuring out what can we do to address the chaos that the current president of the United States is continuing to cause.
Speaking of that chaos that you just spoke of, you and President Trump have been trading barbs over everything from funding for the Baltimore Key Bridge, sending troops into Baltimore, and also what you mentioned earlier, the flooding assistance, the denial of assistance for the flooding that happened in Western Maryland. Where do things stand? Let's first talk about Western Maryland. How is that situation?
We continue to push and fight to make sure that the people of Western Maryland are not left behind. You know, we were some of the first boots on ground when they had these historic floods, where there were literally boats that had to go to the second floor of a schoolhouse to save children because the first floor is completely washed away. And then we heard from the President of the United States that Maryland does not warrant support. And I literally had to explain to them and say, you do understand that the people in Allegheny and Garrett County, those are people who voted for you, Mr. President. And you're ignoring them in a real time of need. I saw such heroic leadership from people like the mayor of Westernport, a Republican mayor, Mayor Judy, who, by the way, was one of the first people to come out and endorse me for re-election. A Republican mayor came out and endorsed me along with several other Republicans around the state of Maryland. And the reason she did was she said that this governor did not leave us behind. But we're watching how the President of the United States continues to do so. So we have put in a formal appeal. I'm hoping that the President of the United States continues to remember that despite his seeming opposition to me or the people of Maryland, I want to remind him that Marylanders are Americans too.
Let me ask you, you guys traded barbs over funding for the Key Bridge. Where does that stand?
Well, I mean, I'm fortunate that we had a bipartisan grouping of Congress that supported funding for the Key Bridge. The President of the United States had nothing to do with it. The President of the United States did not authorize funding for Key Bridge. And so, as my grandfather used to say, don't let someone take your power when they never gave it to you in the first place. And so we're just really proud of the progress that we've been able to make, historic speed in both the cleanup of the federal channel and also the rebuilding of this bridge. And we plan on continuing to make the people of not just the state, but the people of this country proud.
Let me ask you about his threat to send troops, federal troops, into Baltimore. Yeah. You guys went back and forth pretty hard over that. Clearly you have a background as a member of the military. Yeah. Where do things stand there?
Well, I explained to him, I said, you know, well, first, as someone who's worn the uniform, I was just offended that we're being using these, you know, these courageous men and women as political pawns. Because I can tell you right now that the members of the National Guard, they did not sign up to paint fences. They didn't sign up to pick up trash. You know, we've had members of the National Guard who've been deployed to Washington, D.C., who have taken more selfies than made arrests. And so I find it deeply disrespectful to the military, to our military community, to our military families, that he would use these members of the National Guard as something that is deeply performative. And I told him, I said, listen, you know, we've had historic drops in violent crime and property crime in the state of Maryland, and I would love to educate him about how we did it, but also we would love to have more federal resources that actually make sense. Things like FBI resources, ATF resources, being able to ban ghost guns, being able to deal with these Glock switches that essentially are turning Glocks into automatic weapons. Like, that's actually real tangible things that I would love to work with a serious administration on this issue, but I'm not getting seriousness from this administration. We are truly getting performative.
Mm-hmm. Let me bring this back to the shutdown before we close out. What is your message for the thousands of federal workers who are facing uncertainty about whether they're going to get a paycheck, whether they will be fired, the businesses that rely on the money from those workers? What is your message to them?
You know, my message to them is that we honor your service. My message to them is that we believe in you, and we're thankful that you raised your hand to serve. That you raise your hand to do really hard work, oftentimes for lower pay, because you believe in the people of this state and because you believe in serving this country. And I want to let them know that here in Maryland, that we have their back. And, you know, I've heard from people who have said, you know, thank God we live in Maryland at this time. And I just want to tell them that you have a governor and an administration and a congressional delegation, you have neighbors, and you have advocates who are going to fight for your humanity, even when it feels like the federal government doesn't seem to care.
All right. Maryland Governor Wes Moore, thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us.
I appreciate you, Shawn. Thank you.